common misperception that I come across every once in a while is people believing that the Labour Party of the UK is somehow a socialist party. However, I see really no reason for anyone to actually believe that. But according to the CPGB-ML, the Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist, this does happen, and that there are a significant number of people, particularly young people, who seem to believe that the Labour Party is actually a socialist organization. I'm sure maybe they have some kind of history of a few social programs here and there that help people. But I would think that given the tremendous drive to end social programs and attack many of the public institutions that people require would certainly give one pause to reconsider. Then there's the whole thing about the Labour Party bringing the UK to the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that action alone by Tony Blair should really have put the kibosh on anybody's belief that somehow the Labour Party is socialist. As a foreigner, yet still inside the Commonwealth, it strikes me very odd that anyone would believe that the Labour Party was somehow socialist, given its tremendous support for the Iraq and Afghan wars. After all, it has now been revealed. I mean, it is now known that both of those wars were based on a lie, that they really had nothing to do with capturing Osama bin Laden or fighting terrorism at all. And in fact, they were actually designed to create spheres of influence where much Western power was lacking, not to mention the tremendous effort that was put forth in Iraq to really capture control of oil fields. And as we can see, that wasn't entirely all that successful now that ISIS actually controls some of them. Now, this was done under Tony Blair. This was a very blatant pro-imperialist move. This had nothing to do with trying to help anybody. As we can tell, both of those wars really didn't help anything but the pocketbooks of many of the capitalist class. So that alone, such deliberate, huge amounts of mass murdering, merely for profits, for the pocketbooks of many of the capitalist class, you can hardly claim that that's socialist. Another thing that strikes me very odd about the Labour Party is the fact that it's given such tremendous support to Israel. There is the Labour Friends of Israel, where Ed Miliband actually did speak in the defense of Israel existing and acknowledging or supporting its right to fire back against the people of the country who they're actually occupying. Now, as socialists, Marxists, what have you, the point of us is to understand that imperialism is the primary contradiction in the world, and that is Israel is occupying Palestinian land, and that is simply unacceptable by our own beliefs. And with that, I leave you with Ed Miliband's statements on that subject.
In the meantime, I think it is equally important that we make sure that, for example, we are intolerant of those who are advocating boycotts of Israel. And I want to be the answer to achieving peace is more dialogue and more cooperation, not boycotts. That is not the answer, and we are absolutely 100% clear about that.
So really I see very little reason to actually consider him to be a socialist, but we should look even further into the history of the Labour Party to see where more of the anti-socialist things that they've done lie. They built British military bases in Kenya. Former Mau revolutionaries are now suing the British government for torture allegations, which do include rape and castration. It's also important to note that they aided the South and the US in the Korean War. Labour even used the Emergency Powers Act of 1920. It was a greatly disliked policy, something that the government put through, and it was used whenever strikes were formed. It was used by Labour Prime Ministers such as Clement Attlee and Harold Wilson against Labour people striking. As if all of this wasn't convincing enough, we should consider that Ed Miliband and the Labour Party have a 5-point plan for responsible capitalism. Essentially, it's just a 5-point plan put out to make capitalism look a little bit more humane. It has really lofty words about getting the capitalist class under control, but really offers nothing to do that. There's no powers there to do so. And frankly, to try and carry out the act of preserving capitalism in some kind of, sustainable form that doesn't have the inherent contradictions that are without it, that cause these problems, it's frankly ridiculous. In no way, shape, or form should a socialist be doing something that preserves capitalism. It should be, in fact, be calling for its death. It should be organizing, promoting class struggle. And frankly, labor just clearly doesn't do that. Not to mention the tremendous efforts that they've put out to basically dismantle the national health system. One of the biggest platforms of the CPG-BML has been opposing labor's cuts to the healthcare service and many others. I mean, there is a tremendous threat right now that the National Health Service will actually be fully privatized, and that the UK will end up with an American-style healthcare system, which Americans right now are actually struggling to get away from. So I don't really know in what any way, shape, or form anyone could think that the Labour Party was socialist. This is really one of the most reactionary histories for being anti-labor that I've frankly ever seen. I mean, how could you even consider yourself to be socialist when you were literally fighting against the socialist DPRK in the Korean War? At best, they're a liberal bourgeois party. Some could even maybe try to make the argument that they're social democrats or for social democracy. But I frankly don't see it. Not with this kind of privatization drive. Really, it's just another one of those things, the softer of the two choices, or more choices given the fact that it's the UK. It's just capitalism with another layer of wool pulling over the voters' eyes to try to make them think that there's some kind of a nicer, gentler capitalism that they could support in opposition to the terrible, terrible Tories. And in fact, it is still just another bourgeois party with the same kind of bourgeois mentality set up only merely to serve the interests of the capitalist class.